Let's now try to write a UI test. The first thing that we're going to need is a frame fixture, which will allow us to test the frame. In the before method, we create a new instance of our Trello form. Since the creation of a frame triggers a paint action, we have to do this in the event dispatch thread. Thankfully, we can use GUI action runner and execute a GUI query using our Trello form as the type to be returned. We override execute in EDT, which stands for event dispatch thread, and inside this method, we return a new instance of the Trello form. A Trello form requires a project and a Trello injector. For the project, we don't really care that much because it's mainly needed inside the Trello injector, so we can just mock it. For the Trello injector, we could use the real implementation that we created, but doing that requires an internet connection, a real project, a real Trello account, and so on and so forth. Instead, we will create a Trello test injector class that will use mocks. In the constructor, we can pass a mock service API and a mock repository that will be returned from the injector. In the Trello state, we will return a real instance with some default values as we did in our presenter test, and finally, in the Trello action presenter, we will return the real implementation, but using the mocks instead. We can now go ahead and swap the Trello injector implementation for a new Trello test injector class, and also create the mocks for the Trello service API and the repository. Now that we have a Trello form instance, we can use the showInFrame method to set the frame fixture. ShowInFrame needs a container that will be used as its content pane. For that, we will use the root pane of our Trello form. All the access to Swing components must be done in the event dispatch thread, so we will install fail on thread violation repaint manager that will fail any tests that are not accessing Swing components in the event dispatch thread. Since the before class annotation requires a static method, we have to do this in the companion object. The last preparation step is to clean up the frame after each test. Let's write our first UI test now. In this test, we're going to check that once the Trello form loads, it shows the description of the selected card. We use the frame and call textbox, which will return a JText component fixture, and then we use with name to fan the description pane. If you remember, when we created the UI, one of the things that we did was to set the name for each UI component, and this is the reason why we did that. We can now assert that the text of the text box will return the expected value. We're not mocking what the repository will return yet, so let's do that. Whenever the getCars method is called using the parameters from our Trello state, it will return a list of cars, and the first one will have my description as the description. We run the test, and it passes as expected. The Swing unit library can actually do a lot of things. For instance, you can also use AndText when searching for a component, and even make sure that it's showing. To simulate pressing keys, you can use press and release keys and pass a list of keys to it. The keys are all prefixed with VK, so don't forget that. But maybe you only want to press the key without releasing, and to do that you can use press key. There is also the option of concatenating actions like click and release key, or if you don't really care about using specific keys, you can use enter text and pass a string to it. If you had a button, you can use click, but you can also be more specific and say that you wanted a left click. Instead of using left click, you can also use the left button method, which allows you to concatenate even more actions like times, so you can simulate a double click. But you also have the double click method as well as the right click. If you were in a list and wanted to do drag and drop, you can use drag and pass the index of the item that you want to drag and concatenate the drop action passing the index again. As you can see, there is a huge amount of methods to interact with the UI, and if you cannot find what you need, check the documentation on this URL.